Welcome to the Solid Verbal. And now, Dan and Ty.
Dan Rubenstein preview season. It's finally upon us. We got one episode that we dropped about a week ago.
Yeah.
Now we're really starting to rev up the engines. We're flipping up to 3 episodes a week, every Sunday, every Tuesday, every Thursday. And we are officially on this episode, starting off with our conference previews. We've got the Sun Belt, we've got the MAC, and we've got the American today. On our next episode, we will continue our journey through the group of 5/6 conferences. But alas, welcome back to preview season, my friend. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very glad you mentioned revving up the engine because there's a whole lot of combustion happening and about to happen here on the Solid Verbal. And Ty, look, we're nearing the apex of summertime, and everybody wants to be hot. Ty, every team wants to be hot. Every program wants to be hot. You want hot soup. You want hot coffee, right? You want a hot shower. Like there's a certain amount of pleasure, Ty. Pleasure. That comes with friction. That comes with heat, Ty. And we accidentally decided.
Totally by accident.
Thematically. But you know what? I think it works really well. Like, I feel like we can put these puzzle pieces together to make it work, to combine the silly with the literal with the sensical. And I like heat as a theme here, Ty, because
yeah, I do too.
Even if the idea of momentum can be argued, the idea of juice and the idea of a program or player or coach or system or whatever having heat, it can't be argued because you just have to believe it or you don't. It's fine. And I like the idea of going into this preview season with a sort of heat scale, with figurative thermometers in the back of our heads as we try to assess program, conference, player, coach, situation, heat. And
yeah, we're doing a heat check. This is a big old heat check.
I'm thrilled with it, Ty. I'm thrilled with it that we got to this point because we were having fun with Lorenzo Lamas and the very short-lived show Are You Hot?
Very short-lived, very inappropriate.
Yeah.
I have 4 Lamas sounds now on the soundboard, obviously, because that's what we do here. We will roll those out as we see fit.
Yes.
I did jot down a bunch of flaws that I found as I went through the Sun Belt and the American for this episode. So we'll get to that here in due course. But yes, we happened upon this by accident. I am weirdly very excited about the theme, and I am really excited to actually talk some football. You know, we've spent far too long this offseason talking about news things and administrative things, business things, money, like all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Certainly has its place. But when we can actually talk football, that's when I think the juices really start to get flowing. So I'm excited to do this here with you. If you are excited to be along for us on this journey, hit follow, hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of our episodes. We would also encourage you to go on out to verballers.com, verballers.com. You get the episodes without the ads a little bit early. You get access to our Discord community. We are going to be spinning up a game in time for the season. If you're interested in just seeing what it's all about, you can just go out to the website and sign up for free.
Yeah.
And you'll still get updates sent out to you, even if you're not a paying person at this point. That's fine. We don't care. We just want to have as many people under the big tent as we can. So verballers.com, again, is where you can go for more information on that. And the only other thing that I will add here as a means of context, if you are listening to this and we get something wrong, I am mostly talking about me getting something wrong.
You shouldn't be.
A name.
Yeah.
Perhaps a name, because you know I have a track record for that. solidverbal@gmail.com. Let us know. We're not going to be perfect. You're always going to know your team a little better than us because we're a national show. Let us know. Let us know. I definitely went to greater lengths this year trying to farm out interesting nuggets on some of these teams that I'm going to talk about, and I can reference some of those spots for people who are interested as well and doing further research on their own out on the web.
Yeah.
But if we get something wrong, let us know, okay? Don't be a dick about it, but
fair.
Let us know. We would also benefit from knowing if we're wrong about something.
This would be a good time to remind everybody that the year was 2015. We were doing an ad for Blue Apron, and Ty overthought the read and said, they'll send you, Blue Apron will send you such dishes as like a caprese salad, complete with fresh Globe tomatoes. It was a nice moment.
It was,
and
it was
you
a
left
great
it in the
moment for all
show,
of us.
to your credit.
I didn't know. I didn't
call
was
you out
flustered.
in the moment.
No.
Oh, nice. That was good by me then. Hey, real quick, it'd be great if you could consider subscribing to the YouTube channel down below. It really helps us out.
Why don't we start off this grand shindig by talking about the Sun Belt, Dan?
Okay.
Let's talk about the Sun Belt. 14 teams.
Right there in the title. The hottest conference name there is. It's got the sun right there.
Could it be any more thematic to start
Agree.
our heat check with the Sun Belt? The Sun Belt's interesting for a whole multitude of reasons. I wanted to lead off with this conference in particular because when we talked about it last year, I feel like we just didn't give it enough credit. It's a good conference. It's a fun conference to watch. You know, we have a lot of what I would classify as G5 hipsters that follow this show.
Sure.
People that have power conference teams, but for one reason or another find the G5 more entertaining. And so they maybe don't have a reason to root for a specific team, but they just find reason in our community to cheer on the G5 conferences.
Yeah.
And the Sun Belt is fun as hell, and I want to talk more about it than we did a year ago.
Agree. I think we should.
There are 5 teams in this conference with an identical over-under of 7.5 wins. Those being James Madison, Louisiana, South Alabama, Georgia Southern, and Texas State.
Okay.
So we've got a cluster at the top. We've got a cluster in the middle, 6 teams that have an over-under of 6.5 or 5.5. And then we got 3 on the bottom. We've got 3 teams that are either 4.5 or 3.5 in terms of their win total. I think the clusters really make for an interesting season. And I think that's especially true in the West. Remember, this is a conference that still has an East and a West division. They're unique in that sense. Not a lot of that anymore in college football. But in particular, that race that I think we're going to see unfold between Louisiana and South Alabama, Texas State, I'll include, maybe even Troy. I think that's going to be a really, really fun race to watch.
Sure.
So that in and of itself, I think, makes it an interesting conference. The other thing that makes all of these conferences that we're going to talk about over the next 2 episodes really interesting is the sheer amount of roster turnover, Dan.
Yeah.
Have you
Fortunately
been
or unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. Have you been experiencing this as well as you were going through and putting together previews for your conferences and teams? Because I am aghast at the amount of roster turnover we're going to have to go through here over the next 2 episodes.
Well, you also get to learn which D2 players or FCS players left a mark last year because they're now playing for UMass. They're now playing for Marshall. And, you know, as the power conferences, the quote unquote power conferences, look to, you know, the MAC or the Mountain West or the Sun Belt or whoever for infusing depth and talent and, you know, adding potential star power to a certain position, those schools have spaces to fill. And so, yeah, I just learned about the Ferris State team and the Shippensburg team. And you got to find it's everybody's, I guess, trickling down to find the next player to plug in or the next group of players to form a new defensive line or something. So, yeah, especially in the MAC, especially as coaches leave, like Tim Albin did at Ohio, you're seeing a ton of roster turnover. And you can look at it one of 2 ways. You can say, what a bummer that, you know, there's no such thing as continuity as soon as you get to some of these conferences. But on the other hand, it makes for hopefully a continued wide open season that somebody who didn't necessarily look like they were going to vie for a conference title is suddenly in the thick. And I'm okay with that.
Where do you want to start in the Sun Belt? Like, what are your points of intrigue? I know this was kind of my area of focus, but I do enjoy kind of kicking it back and forth a little bit here. I'm just so in the weeds with this now. I spent a good chunk of my weekend going through YouTube videos at like 2x speed and taking notes. And like, I'm really in it with this conference because I wanted to give it its due. From a high level, where are you at with the Sun Belt? Where are your points of, I guess, curiosity?
Well, I mean, the depth at or near the top. The Heat is always going to be where I want to start, just because I want to know where the bar is and what teams who have been good are doing to stay good, and what teams who have not been consistently good are doing to ascend to that hot Heat level.
Yeah, so while you were talking there, I was vamping a little bit. I did add some sounds to the board that I think are relevant here. If you want to start at the top, we can start with James Madison.
Yes.
This is where the Heat is in this conference, in my opinion. Per Bill Connolly's projections, I've got, and some of my own stuff that I put together here, though it's not as scientific, I've got JMU as a solid 6 to 7 point favorite over the next, what I would consider best teams in the conference. Louisiana, Georgia Southern, and South Alabama. I think we've got a clear stratification there with respect to JMU. Their over-under is 7.5. They're one of those teams that's kind of clustered at the top, but I feel really good about where this team is at. 9-4 a year ago. They went 4-4 in conference, won their bowl game. My expectation for JMU this year is that they're going to win the East Division, that they're going to play for a conference title, and ultimately that they're going to be in the mix for the playoff. This is the other bit of calculation I think that's interesting as we go through these conferences. There's definitely an impulse to look at this on the macro level and which of the teams that we're going to discuss do we think are good enough to be considered for the playoff, as well as sort of the micro level, which I think people care more about. So I don't want to drone on too much about the playoff stuff, but I do think it's important when it's relevant. And in this case, it certainly is. JMU is one of those teams that I think we're going to have a conversation about. Bill Connolly gives them about a 20% shot of winning the Sun Belt as a whole, which is double the next closest teams. They probably could have done it last year, if I'm being honest. They just couldn't seal the deal.
Right.
Which is a whole other conversation. I just don't think it's hard to figure out what JMU is going to be, especially on offense this season, because this is a coach, this is a coaching staff. Staves?
Multiple staves, yeah.
It has proven very adept at being adaptable to the personnel. And this season, they've got a big-time strength in the running back room. They got 4 quality options, low-key one of the better running back rooms in the country. You know, they got some guys to replace up front, but I just think the combination of George Pettaway and Wayne Knight and Joby Mallory and Iowa Day, the transfer from North Texas, those 4 guys are going to get a lot of work, and they should. They should. Also, they bring over a guy from Holy Cross, Jordan Fuller, who was like a 1,000-yard guy.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems to me like Bob Chesney, who was the first-year coach last year, now entering his second year with JMU, if he kind of reverts back to form, he's going to want to line you up and beat your brains in on the ground.
Yeah.
Even though they were active in the portal and they went out and they got pass catchers, I just don't think that's going to be the philosophy. I think they want to line you up. I think they want to beat your brains in. And I think it gets even more interesting when you consider the quarterback situation. So last season, remember, Alonzo Barnett had a really good year, kind of a breakout year, but then he blew out his ACL in the last game of the season. It's unclear to me whether or not he's going to be healthy to start the season. It's unclear to me that even if he is healthy, he's going to be the starter, because Bob Chesney went out and he brought back his former quarterback via UNLV, Matt Sluka.
Yep.
Remember him?
Mm-hmm.
Matt Sluka is now back with his old coach. They also went out and got Cam Coleman, quarterback from Richmond. This is a flexible system, okay? However, I will come back to this again. If you know anything about Bob Chesney, if you've done any research, there is certainly a clear preference for dual threat quarterbacks and a really strong ground game. So it's either going to be Alonzo Barnett or Matt Sluka, in my opinion. And I think you're going to get a really fun rushing attack this year, which is going to obliterate some of these Sun Belt defenses. Like, truly, if you can build a beast of a ground game in the Sun Belt, there are very few defenses in this conference that are going to be able to stop you.
Agree.
So I like where they're at on the offensive side of the ball. I'm curious to see what that formula looks like and how they adapt things. But defensively, like, they're stout. You know, this is a top 40 defense. A year ago, there's enough back that you got to expect the defense is, again, a relative strength, certainly within the conference. there are enough new faces that are worth monitoring. They did add 13 defensive transfers, and a handful of those guys come from the FCS ranks, which we know doesn't always click right away. But defensively, they should have a relative strength there as well. The really interesting bit, if you are charting JMU this year, is the schedule and the way it sets up, because you've kind of got two distinct phases. Early on, they've got a game at Louisville in week 2 and at Liberty in week 4. And that shows, or should show, their ability to go out of conference and play against some teams that can serve maybe later on in the conversation as a measuring stick. Certainly Louisville going there it's a nice game. And the game against Liberty is meaningful too. Could have real playoff ramifications for both sides of that. Then you get a little bit later on in the season and you start getting into your conference games, right? You start getting into Louisiana week 7. You start getting into these games that I think are going to be more meaningful with how they stack up in the Sun Belt. So across the board, there are enough road games that I'm really not taking anything for granted, but I do think this is the best team in the Sun Belt. Again, on paper, this drops early July, right? As best we can tell at this point.
Yeah.
I like them a lot. I'm inclined to go over 7.5 if I were a betting man, not because there aren't losses on this schedule. I think there probably will be a couple. It just doesn't feel like a 7-5 team to me, Dan. I think they're better than that. They're a lot better than that. Whether or not they make the playoff, they're 8-4 or better, in my opinion.
Okay.
If that all makes sense to you.
It does. Absolutely. I anticipate big things. Although, look, year 1, Bob Chesney being able to, even with as much as Kurt Signetti was able to take with him to Indiana, right? That you're never positive what you're getting with a year 1 when a coach is coming in with a different roster. As much as the transfer portal can affect things, it's a wild card. So year 2 is certainly going to be more fascinating.
Yeah. And I guess their primary competition, if you read the preview pubs, is Louisiana. Louisiana was 10-4 a year ago. They lost to Marshall in the conference title game, and they lost to TCU in the New Mexico Bowl. Athlon got a quote from an anonymous Sun Belt assistant, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. But the gist of it was that last season was a really big deal for Louisiana's coach, Michael DeZormo. Mm-hmm. Remember, he was the one who took over for Billy Napier. Before last year, it was 2 consecutive seasons of 6 and 7. And on the heels, I would add, of like a couple double-digit win seasons and 3 bowl wins. So to go 10-2 in the regular season last year, just to make the title game, that was a big deal. That was a really big deal. They got smoked in their last 2 games, mostly because of quarterback injuries. So don't read too much into the way they closed out that season. I think this is a solid program, but if we can get out the Lorenzo Lamas flaw finder.
Please.
All right, I'm going to introduce my flaw finder, okay?
7 starters back from last year's team. They have very much taken the same approach as Billy Napier at Florida, in that they brought in only a handful of transfers, which I'll discuss, but they're mostly rolling with their homegrown guys.
Okay.
So this is a less experienced team than a year ago. We've been doing these previews for a long time, Dan.
Yeah.
And I would say, with rare exception, when I see that you've got just 7 starters, I put up 8 fingers.
That's
when I meant
okay.
to say
Don't
7,
tell people.
Not a math major. I'm a podcaster. When you've got just 7 starters back, that's almost always a hard pass for me.
Okay.
Now, I'm not worried about the bottom falling out on Louisiana, because I do like the talent they have on hand. I think the schedule is favorable. It's just that there are a lot of ifs with this team.
Yeah.
And if we're being honest, I got to call that out. So the biggest if here for people at home is quarterback.
Okay.
The transfer is Walker Howard from Ole Miss, who until now, as a college prospect, his claim to fame is that weird video of him and Brian Kelly doing like the 360 dance thing. You remember that when he committed? I was crazy about this guy as a recruit. So I've been dying to see him get a little bit more game action. I'm glad he caught on somewhere. If he pops, the conversation's different about Louisiana. Suddenly we're not talking about experience or any of that stuff. We're talking about them winning the West, playing for the conference again. Even if he doesn't pop, frankly, I still think we got to consider Louisiana as most likely the team to beat in the West, just because the other teams in their division are far more flawed. And this is an athletic team, a physical team. it's a roster that I think on its own merit stands for something. I wouldn't bet the 7.5 over, but I like the roster. I really do like the roster. The other thing that I would add before we move on here.
By the way, should be noted before you add, this is the only conference with divisions. So when you talk about the team to beat in this division, I know. It didn't sink in with me. Continue.
No, it's an interesting wrinkle. Another interesting wrinkle. I'm going to call this out because I've been looking at schedules and I know you have too.
Yeah.
Louisiana goes to Mizzou on week 3.
Ooh.
For Mizzou, that's 1 week after the border war against Kansas and 1 week before hosting South Carolina. Interesting letdown look ahead spot there.
Okay.
Louisiana has been competitive in these games before. I don't know about against Mizzou, but just throwing that one out there is an interesting spot, I think, for the people.
Okay.
So I like them. 7 returning starters, brand new quarterback. My flaw finder is out and about.
Let's be clear. The Lorenzo Lamas flaw finder was, or maybe still is privately, a laser pointer with which he circles parts of people's bodies that are either too far gone to improve or need improvement.
No, here's one for you.
I'm not necessarily pointing at any flaws. I'm pointing right now at perfection.
So he had a softer side when he did that. The show was highly inappropriate.
I mean, it depends on your your perspective. Yeah.
I guess it depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
I would say this about Louisiana.
I'm spicy.
Okay.
Not as hot as JMU, but they've got a good spice level.
Okay.
South Alabama, another 7.5 over/under win team. 7-6 a year ago. They won the bowl game. Did beat Louisiana 24-22 last season. South Alabama to me is the ink blot test of the Sun Belt. Okay. What you see when you look at South Alabama, it says a lot more about you than it does about them. Because on one hand, you've got the cruel reality, which is that Major Applewhite is a really good coach who got annihilated in the transfer portal. I mean, they got obliterated. They lose Gio Lopez, their quarterback, to North Carolina. They lose your guy, Fluff Bothwell, the running back, to Mississippi State. They lose a right tackle, an edge rusher, 3 corners, a kicker, and to boot their offensive coordinator. It's a lot. And then on the other hand, there's really enough back to kind of feel like okay about where they're at. Quarterback is an open question, yes. It's either Bishop Davenport, who was the MVP of the bowl game, I believe, or Zach Pyron, who comes over from Minnesota, was originally at Georgia Tech.
Yep.
These are capable guys. They're capable enough. The offensive line looks good to me. I don't know. I think that's a strength. Even though they lose your guy Fluff, Kentrell Bullock is like an all Sun Belt caliber back who had over 800 yards last season. Again, lining it up, running it directly at a Sun Belt defense is usually a pretty good formula. So if they can do that, I think they'll be okay. We have come to expect good offenses from Major Applewhite teams. I'm curious if it looks different this year because the wide receiver core is basically starting over. Basically, I don't know what to expect there. So I know he likes to pass it, but I think the strength might be more on the ground than through the air. Also kind of starting over on the defensive line and the secondary. Both are huge concerns. If I'm South Alabama, again, I run the crap out of the ball. I eat the clock. I try to keep the defense off the field.
Yeah.
There's a lot of half-team potential here with the Jaguars. I think a lot of the defense is a work in progress. I would not go with the over 7.5 for South Alabama. There's just too many variables here to feel good about where they're going to be. I don't think it's going to be a bad team. I think they'll be competitive. I'm just not super confident that it's all going to click, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Right.
Interesting note, they host Louisiana on November the 1st. I could totally see that game being a lot like last year, decided 24-22, something of that nature. I think there's going to be a propensity for both of them to play sort of ground and pound and slow and just try to keep the defense off the field as much as possible.
Makes sense.
So I like the Jaguars. I do. Just don't like them all that much.
Right.
And then the other, if I'm going by cluster here, the other team that I think is really interesting in this conference is Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern has not been talked about nearly enough.
Okay. Give me some Clay thoughts.
That's a full stop. we don't talk enough about Clay Helton and the job he's done. Like,
Yeah.
he took a lot of shit for what went down at USC, but his ability here to kind of shepherd this team from running triple option to now more of an air raid.
Successfully.
He's been successful at doing that.
Mm-hmm.
That almost never happens. There's almost always another coach that steps in after a previous coach attempts the transition because it's hard. You don't have the personnel. It takes forever. He's been able to do it. It is not an easy transition. It's really freaking hard to do. He's done a good job of it. He got a new contract as a result of it in the offseason. He has done a really good job at Southern. 8-5 a year ago. 2 of their 5 losses were against Boise and Ole Miss. The others were at Old Dominion, home against Troy, home against Sam Houston in the bowl game. I guess not home against Sam Houston.
Right.
Game, but against Sam Houston in the bowl game. They did beat JMU. They did beat Marshall. Marshall, of course, and ended up as the conference champion. I like this team a lot. It's another half team, though.
No D?
I'll talk about the defense in a second. But, like, offensively, this is probably the best offense that Clay Helton's had in his time here. And I think it's going to pose a real issue in a conference where there just aren't good secondaries, Dan. They're few and far between here. I think J.C. French, their junior quarterback, is going to have a big year. I like his options out wide. They've got good depth. This is a line that brings back 3 starters, 4 guys with starting experience. I'm willing to talk about this being the best line in the conference and one of the better offenses in the conference.
Sure.
I think it's going to be a legit good passing offense that's going to have teams on skates. The question is defense, though. It's like, yes, it got better last season from 2023, but we're still talking about like the 91st best defense in the country. So I think they're good up front. I think they're okay in the back. They brought in some younger transfers that maybe can grow with the team, but it's just an open question about like how much better is this defense going to get? Used to say it about teams all the time. Oklahoma's one that comes to mind, but like marginal improvement on defense makes this team a lot better. Marginal improvement probably makes me feel good about taking that over 7.5. I still like them to go over 7.5. I would like them more if I felt better about the defense. I thought Bill Connolly said it best when he said that they have a high floor. I tend to agree. I can squint and see a 9-3 season. I don't want to put my name to that.
Okay.
I would go over 7.5 here for these guys. I think they're also very spicy.
I'm spicy.
I like them. I do like them.
What's the next group?
That's sort of your cluster at the top.
Yes.
All right. Your next group is where we start like, okay, where are we headed with this thing? Where are we going? We've got a bunch of teams that are clumped together with 6.5 over-unders or 5.5 over-unders. Marshall went 10-3 last year. They won the conference, and then they did not play in the bowl game because so many guys transferred out when Charles Huff left.
Yes.
This was a certified mess at the end of last season. 10-3, 2 of the 3 losses were against Virginia Tech and Ohio State. So not bad losses. They also won a crazy overtime game, 2 overtime game against JMU, last game of the season. Their third loss was against Georgia Southern, who I just mentioned, 24-23. Talk about a friggin' whipsaw, man. Like, you put it on Louisiana, you win the conference 31-3. Then Charles Huff and pretty much everybody leaves to the point where they opt out. 50 Marshall players went in the portal. 5-0.
That's so many people.
It's
in any
crazy.
context. Yeah.
Crazy. As Phil Steele put it, and I thought this was a great way to kind of add context here, there are more returning Marshall players on the Southern Miss roster than there are on Marshall. 21 of those 50 ended up going with Charles Huff to Southern Miss.
Yeah.
Which is a crazy number. So, look, now they got Tony Gibson stepping in from NC State. It's like an unprecedented test of how he's going to be able to construct this roster with how it's reset. This isn't even, I've joked about Control-Alt-Delete before. This isn't even a Control-Alt-Delete. This is, hey, unplug it for 30 seconds, let the router reboot, and then plug it back in and see what happens. They returned 0 rushing yards from last year's roster. One of their 8 defensive linemen with more than 50 snaps. Only 3 linebacker snaps. from last year's team. Not guys, snaps. And only 2 of their 13 defensive backs with more than 30 snaps. So this is ridiculous. Yet, the vibes are good.
Hey,
the vibes are really good.
Yeah.
Ticket sales are up. Donations are up. The fan base seems engaged. It's a coaching staff with like really strong West Virginia roots, Tony Gibson and some of the others on the staff. People are excited to like move forward with a new chapter, which I thought was kind of cool, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of reports about guys buying in, you know? It's the popular cliche whenever you've got a new guy in town, but if you're going to strip it down to the studs and start over, especially in this dramatic a fashion, to get buy-in like this, like, all right. They're going to try to build the offense for speed, like rely a lot on the run, have a little bit of pop that they can beat you deep if you overcommit. It looks like the new quarterback is Carlos Del Rio Wilson. Remember him?
Of course.
Syracuse or Zion Turner from UConn, both of whom are like mobile guys who fit the system. It's just a hard schedule. It's a team that's entirely new. The over-under is 5.5. I'm not touching that. But I do think the fact that the vibes are strong at Marshall is a good thing. That's at least a good starting point. We know that can wear off quickly. But at least for the time being, you know, that's an okay place to be.
Yes.
What else do we got here? Arkansas State. I love Arkansas State.
Okay. Why is that?
You know how we get emails every year from people who are like abroad, maybe on a military base, and they want an offbeat wild card team to root for? I'm going to nominate Arkansas State.
Okay.
Red Wolves.
Why is that?
Red Wolves.
I'm spicy.
8 wins last year. It was year 4 of Butch Jones. He has improved this team's win total every season since he's been in Jonesboro.
Mm-hmm.
I did look up where Arkansas State is located. I did not know Jonesboro off the top of my head. Okay. Full disclosure, this is a show about honesty.
Yeah.
This is going to be a fun team on offense. This team's going to be fun as hell on offense. Jalen Rayner, their quarterback, he was the Sun Belt Freshman of the Year 2 years ago, had a better season last year. There's enough back that he's going to improve again. So now this is also his 3rd season under Keith Heckendorf, the offensive coordinator. All too often in this day and age, we see coordinators coming and going. His 3rd year with the same coordinator, I think, is also reason enough to give us confidence that he's going to continue improving. He can run. He is mobile. That is not his preference. He wants to throw it. And he's just one of these guys that finds a way to make things happen on a busted play. He's
Okay.
Wide receiver 1, Corey Rucker. He already leads Arkansas State just over his career in terms of receiving yardage. They bring in some help as well. I think they go about 3 deep at running back, which are Quez Cross, who had 1,300 all-purpose yards last season. I really like this team. The problem I have, where's my flaw finder?
You know, your face and your personality make up for that extra 7 to 10
Oh, no.
pounds you can probably get rid of.
Just brutal. Lamas is brutal.
Woo!
What a jerk. The flaw is that you're only a wild card if, you know, you're only enter into this wild card conversation for me if you've got some real flaws. And Arkansas State loses 4 of 5 linemen. So there's a question about up front keeping their skill talent upright, healthy.
Yep.
And there are questions about on the defense, man. Like, this is a bad defense a year ago. There's only 1 starter back. Butch tried to work the portal to beef up the defense. I'm just not sure how that's going to go. So I think the reason that I point to Arkansas State as one of those interesting teams is they're going to play in a lot of shootouts. They've got really good skill talent that we should see on display.
Yeah.
And they got questions everywhere else.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't think they're contending for the West, but I think they're going to dump 1 or 2 teams of merit. They do host Iowa State a week after the Cyhawk game. They host Georgia Southern a week after Southern plays in their rivalry against Georgia State. Another fun scheduling quirk that I found for Arkansas State, 6 of Arkansas State's 12 games fall before or after an opponent's bye.
Wow.
So, you know, you got a high-powered offense against team playing maybe a getaway game, or I don't know, just something to monitor.
For your consideration on any podcast player, search Solid Verbal, find us, and hit follow or subscribe. It's just that easy.
All right, so I'm long-winded.
Okay, you're okay.
What are we at? We're at 30 minutes. It did
Yes.
5 teams.
Yes.
That's 6 teams. That's a little much.
Okay.
So let me tell you why to be entertained about the rest of the Sun Belt. I have a lot more detail here. We can share some of that maybe on a bonus episode.
Sure.
I'll make a post-it. Well, if these are things that are of interest to you and you're a Patreon member, let me know. But teams that entertain me, Old Dominion entertains me.
Tell me
I think
why.
Old Dominion is one of these teams that's worth following. 6 of 7 losses last year were in 1-score games. So I like their quarterback situation with Colton Joseph. He was a nice catalyst for this offense. In conference games a year ago, ODU was second in yards per play. It's just like depth. It's skill positions. It's finding the right guys to put around him that I think could make this team more interesting. The schedule...
I kind of have a problem with your hair. It's bothering
The
me.
schedule's brutal.
Yeah.
At Indiana, at Virginia Tech, Liberty, at JMU, at Georgia Southern.
Yeah.
That's tough. That's tough. Over under 6.5. I'm not touching it, but I do like what I see from ODU. I think we'll see improvement. I think they're going to be really competitive. I think they might challenge JMU or Georgia Southern.
They're
Definitely
a great bottom line team, right?
Yeah,
That ODU's up on Virginia Tech by how many with how much time left? Yes.
I'm on board with them finishing top half of the East. Probably not going to sign up for much more than
Okay.
that. I am going in a little bit on Troy. I'm not a Jared Parker fan.
Sounds like you are.
I'm still not.
Okay.
I would have paid for the first class plane ticket to get him out of South Bend to go to any job, not just this one.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say this. It is not entirely surprising to see Troy, a program that had 5 double-digit win seasons in the last decade, drop to 4-8 last season for reasons other than the coach. Okay? We cannot put it all on Jared Parker. There were 4 starters back last year, dog. 4. And it was a tough schedule. The quarterback got hurt in the first series of their conference play. However cynical I am on Jared Parker, we should mention that he stepped into a rebuilding situation and he didn't torpedo the whole thing.
Right. But a winning program in Troy
program.
with John Sumrall. Yeah.
And the reason that I think we should feel good about them and the reason that I'm entertained and the reason that I think there's at least a little bit of spice on them.
I'm spicy.
They started 1-7. They finished 3-1. They did not bail on him.
Yeah.
They did not bail on him. So they're definitely still in rebuilding mode. It doesn't sound like they're talking that way internally. There's a lot of belief and you hear about all the positive vibes and stuff internally. Part of the issue last year was that quarterback injury to Goose Crowder, who's now back. Also, they call him Goose, which is fun.
Mm-hmm.
That keeps me entertained.
Of course.
I think he's back. I think that's good. I think they've taken a hit elsewhere. I still like the over 5.5. There might be 6 losses on the schedule. I don't see 7. So I see a feisty 6-6 team. And I put a lot of stock in these teams. You know this, that finish strong, even when the season's basically over. So I like Troy. I like Coastal. Coastal Carolina 6-7 last year. Last year was a comedy of errors, which didn't help. Got worse across the board last year, but still went to a bowl, which is a plus.
Yes.
In its own right. According to Phil Steele, there are 67 new players on this roster, which is nuts.
Yeah.
I had to triple check that. Unless he made a mistake and other people made a mistake, 67 new people is a lot. That's a lot. And it's hard for Tim Beck to build chemistry based on that. There are positives. They bring back, I think enough to feel dangerous. They went out. They did attack the portal in a way that I think is meaningful. I'm optimistic about the offense. I like their new offensive coordinator, Drew Hollingshead.
Okay.
If I said that correctly, he looks like Kellen Moore with a beard. Is
Okay.
What I'm getting at here. But I like what they bring back. There's a veteran presence out wide. Jameson Tucker, Cameron Wright. I'm not going to list names here. Okay. I really wanted to list Coastal as a dark horse in the East. I can't do it. There is too much new. I think the schedule is really tough. They also played James Madison at home the last game of the year, in addition to at UVA, at South Alabama, at ODU, at App State, at Georgia Southern, at South Carolina, just in case they need another loss in there.
Right.
I will talk in more detail about Coastal Carolina on one of our bonus episodes, but I like them. I'm struggling with how much I like them.
Okay.
Like I still haven't figured that part out yet. App State's like entirely new. 5.5 over under.
New coach. Yep.
Yeah, it's all new.
Bill Loggins. Yeah.
2024 was the first losing season they've had since they joined the FBS ranks back in 2014. And so that's given way to Extreme Makeover Mountaineer Edition is what we're looking at here with the coaching staff and the scheme and a ton of new players and just complete uncertainty about what happens next. This is the reason why I said a few weeks ago, and I think some people misinterpreted this, App State's one of the more interesting teams in the country because it could all go horribly wrong. It could all go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm fascinated to see what the new coach, Dal Loggins, looks like. He comes over from South Carolina. He looks like a younger version of Matt Rule. If we're talking about doppelganger.
Does he have a smock? Does he have the Baylor smock? No?
Unclear.
Okay.
Very aggressive in the portal, which tells me he's trying to jumpstart this thing quickly and maybe try to pull a Signetti. It's almost impossible to judge this team this year. 17 new starters. How am I supposed to take anything from that? AJ Swan comes over from LSU. It's going to be AJ Swan, JJ Cole at quarterback, comes over from Iowa State.
Yeah, that's LSU that's Vanderbilt as well, right? Before LSU, yeah. Played as a freshman.
Also, their defensive coordinator, DJ Smith, former legend there, you might be surprised to learn wants to run an aggressive attacking defense.
Of course.
I would not touch this win total with a 10-foot pole. I am also not judging this season purely on wins and losses. I think we're going to learn a lot by just understanding how long it takes for the team to mesh, level of effort throughout the course of the season. It's so easy to lose the plot when you're basically speed dating, trying to fill roster spots like this. And you put a bunch of guys together who don't know each other. Like, they could come together. It could bode well, really well for Dal Loggins, but I just, if it looks good and if it seems like they're on the same page by the end of the year, that's a dub in my book.
Okay.
Texas State. I like Texas State. I'm not sure how much.
Okay.
They also have a 7.5 win total. I forgot to mention them earlier. I like GJ Kinney. Like, that's it. I've liked him since he got there. He's the portal king of the G5 ranks. 50 new guys last year, 36 again this year.
Jeez.
He's raised the floor for this program with back-to-back 8 and 5 seasons. So the offense, in particular, is fun as hell. This is why we watch Texas State. But Jordan McLeod is gone. So, new quarterback, Brad Jackson, I don't know. He might not be the best fit for the program. It might be another transfer that they got. Keldrick Lusser, who comes over from SMU. Nate Yarnell is also in town. I'm really curious to see how the offense takes shape. I think that's the point of intrigue for Texas State. They've got good options in the running back room and, elsewhere. He doesn't tend to rely on one guy on the ground, so I think we're going to see a bunch of guys get a lot of work, but I won't play the flaw finder sound. The problem's like defense for Texas State. You already knew that. Pass rush in the line. The pass rush in the line actually are good. The problem is if you don't have the secondary that can sort of back you up when you're rushing the passer like that, that's a problem. And that's where they got into trouble. So they need to continue getting better either in the secondary or up front, preferably both. Mm-hmm. And if they don't, it's a real problem. And also they had killer penalties, like boneheaded penalties last year in key spots. So I don't know if that's a communication thing, a coaching thing, or what. They need to get better at that. One game to watch here on the schedule, October the 4th against Arkansas State. It's going to be a fun shootout.
Nice.
What else do I got here? Talk about Georgia State. I like Del McGee. There was a lot of steam on him when he came over.
Late.
Yeah, they have Christian Veyu back. They have Ted Hurst back out wide. I think the front seven's good. I think it's notable on this show that they have a safety named DeIcy Hopkins.
Okay, on the Heat show, yeah.
But it's a tough schedule, and I don't really expect a whole lot.
Okay.
So that said, they signed the best recruiting class in all of the Sun Belt. Better than Louisville, better than Tulane and Kansas and UC. It could just be that this is going to take some time. I think that's where we're at. ULM is fun because they're going to run the hell out of the football. They established an identity last season. As Bill C. put it, they're going to run as much as is allowable. That is their makeup. They're kind of like the Army or Navy of the Sun Belt. So watch for that. I'm interested in going over 4.5 for ULM.
Okay.
Tough schedule, though. Might be 8 bowl teams.
Well, frisky.
Southern Miss, I talked about Charles Huff earlier. They've got a bunch of guys that were on the Sun Belt championship team from a year ago. And they bring over a bunch of other folks from other situations as well. So, it's a lot to get your head around with all these new faces. But if I told you 6 months from now that it all worked and Southern Miss made a bowl, you would believe it.
It'd be a great story, yeah.
In the wake of what Deion Sanders has done and what G.J. Kinney, who I just mentioned at Texas
and
State,
the
has
depths
done.
of where Southern Miss has been.
I kind of like the schedule. I don't think they're winning the conference or the West, but most everybody in this conference saw a ton of roster turnover. Maybe it's not this extreme, but I think there's a real chance that it could work, and people are just missing Southern Miss because, frankly, it's hard to gauge where they're at. I don't think I missed everybody or anybody at this point. I think I got through my Sun Belt. I took way too much time doing it.
You're
I apologize.
okay.
But I'm really excited about the Sun Belt. I think these clusters make it interesting. My pick is JMU.
Okay.
I still think JMU is the pick here. I think they're going to be in the playoff conversation. But there are certainly points of intrigue, and I'll go into all of that more, I promise, on Patreon and unpack some of these other nuggets that I was able to harvest out. But why don't you give me a break?
Yeah.
And why don't we talk about the MAC?
Okay. So the MAC, nobody knows. Nobody knows anything. There are likely 4 good to very good to possibly sometimes good teams at the top in Ohio, Toledo, Miami, and Buffalo. Those seem like they're the teams that have the best chance at distancing themselves from the middle of the conference. Now, we can have an NIU conversation. We can have maybe a Bowling Green conversation. I mean, that's a team that has brought in, new head coach Eddie George, high profile, has been a head coach, albeit at a lower level at Tennessee State, but brings in a guy like Drew Pine. And there's interesting talent at Bowling Green, despite all the turnover with Scott Loeffler leaving for the Philadelphia Eagles, I believe, quarterback's coach job.
Yeah, Scott with one T.
Right. It's you've sort of come to expect what a lot of these teams are going to be every year. And weirdly enough, it goes against what I think the national perception of the MAC was over a lot of time, which is all those shootouts on Tuesday night, 58-52, 49-48 kind of thing. A lot of these teams are led by defense. Like, you can go through most of this conference, short a couple of teams, and say, man, they just can't figure it out on offense, but they can depend on their defense. The defense is ahead of the offense. Last year, the champion, Ohio, was very much the case, so they figured things out late. This is also a conference that just when you group it as a whole, you're going to see a lot of teams start the season 1-3 because there's a lot of money games in the MAC.
There's a lot of pay to play, right?
There's a lot of at Washington, at Florida, at Ohio State to start the season. Like, okay, all right, Kent State, that's a decision. It's funding your entire athletic department for a year. I get it. I don't know how I could do something different. I don't know how I can argue against it. But what ends up happening is a lot of teams start out terribly and have, the points allowed 158, the points scored 16 kind of way to start the season. And then the teams who are actually decent and actually have, the ability to understand how they're weathering September, they rattle off 5 in a row or 6 out of 7. So I guess in terms of our Lorenzo Lamas dictionary, stretch marks, Ty. There's a lot of stretch marks within the MAC. There's a lot. You look at the end of the season last year, there's a lot of lost 5, won 7, won 5, won 7 of 8 kind of situations in the MAC. And that's great. And I'm here for it. I enjoy it. It's always entertaining. Almost all of these teams were depleted or have hired new coaches from, Kent State and the late weird situation with Kenny Burns. There's a new coach there. There's a new coach at Central Michigan with Jim McElwain retiring, stepping down. There's a new coach at UMass who is joining the conference. So there's just, for me to sit here and say I like, this team getting over their 5.5 win total, it's insane. It's insane for most of these teams to have strong opinions. Like, do I think NIU is a well-coached team with Thomas Hammock? Yeah, definitely. they can't figure out offense. That's been a consistent thing with NIU. So what do I feel good about? 5.5, 6.5, 7.5? They beat a team who played for the national championship. I don't know if you remember this in Notre Dame.
Yeah,
but
it's of note here.
They don't play enough good football consistently and haven't been good enough at finding answers on offense to feel really good about them. They're a quality team. There's a lot of quality teams in this conference. And for as much as the turnover, for as much as the lows of recent UMass, and who's joining again for the first time.
Hold on. We have a sound for that.
Please.
A brand new bombshell is entering the villa.
UMass is in the villa.
So in this situation, UMass is Love Island. Everybody's going to love taking on UMass in the short term with a new coach, Joe Harasimiak, coming over from Rutgers.
I think you got the phonetic spelling of that right. Yeah.
Okay. Joe Harasimiak, been a good coordinator at Rutgers, has a very much uphill battle. UMass has taken a lot of different roads to try and find a head coach who can get them to bowl eligibility. Has not worked out. Not worked out for Don Brown, for Walt Bell, who's now at Western Michigan. It's not worked out for a lot of these teams. And so I kind of just want to focus on that top 4 chunkage at the moment, because it doesn't seem like there's a path right now for Akron, who's not even going bowling because the grades and retention rates, the API scores have fallen to a pretty terrible level. Defense is a little bit ahead of its offense, which is weird to say for a Joe Moorhead team, but it's going to be a real tough road for Akron. It's going to be a real tough road for UMass. It's going to be a real tough road for Kent State, probably for Ball State with a new coach. He was Butler's head coach last year, Mike Uremovich. It's going to be, hopefully there will be moments of entertainment from some of those teams and, fun individual players, but the ceiling seems pretty low for that foursome. This has been a conference in that top chunkage everywhere in the conference that has been, I called it, what did I say? Mac Chance U with Deion Colsey and Dequann Finn and Chip Trainum and Drew Pine. There's a lot of guys that you're just like, I hope this is a fun last year for these guys. I really hope this is they find their home. So Dequann Finn coming back to the MAC.
Miami, Ohio. He's Mr. Ohio.
For this show, Ty, we don't need to call it Miami of Ohio because there's no other Miami if we're just talking about the MAC.
That's right.
You have to refer to the other one as Miami of Florida, sir.
That's right. On this show, yes.
Yes. So Chuck Martin's been around forever. He's won a ton of games for Miami. And their big thing is they win a bunch of games and they lose some close games because he's pretty conservative, kind of plays not to win, and now has a fun new quarterback in Dequann Finn, who has succeeded in the MAC at Toledo. Tried to make it work over at Baylor. Didn't work out for him. He's back in the MAC, and Miami will once again likely be led by its defense and will likely once again be a difficult out, even with a ton of roster turnover. I'll stick with that theme. Ohio won the conference last year. Tim Albin and a ton of players left. Tim Albin went to Charlotte. Ohio promoted their offensive coordinator and Brian Smith. They return their starting quarterback, who probably threw too many picks, but was still pretty decent and also ran for 1,000 yards. And this is kind of what Ohio does. They lose a bunch of players and they keep winning. Now, they haven't really won the conference before last year, but they've been competitive. They've been good. I don't believe they have any more Canadian quarterbacks locked in storage of some kind.
The Rourke family dynasty has died.
Nathan and Curtis have moved on to, they're not dead. They've just moved on to new places.
R.I.P.
In life. But Ohio's going to be fun. The Ohio defense should once again be good enough. Even with new players, there's enough continuity in the coaching staff that I feel good that this program is still going to be competitive and a tough program. The schedule's not terrible, and I don't even look at the non-conference. If you look up toughest schedules in the MAC, they're like, this team has West Virginia and Ohio State, and okay, whatever. That's fine. Ohio's going to be good. Toledo, which is weird to say, hasn't been able, is another one of those teams led by its defense. Obviously, they've had notable names in the secondary recently and continue to do so. they have continuity on offense, but they haven't been able to figure things out on offense. I think overall their talent level is still basically the highest in the conference. And so even though they haven't been winning the conference at the level you'd expect, given, the continuity with Jason Candle being there for as long as he has, this is going to be a quality team. So that's Toledo, that's Ohio, that's Miami of Ohio. Excuse me, just Miami. Buffalo's fascinating to me.
The Bulls?
Buffalo. If I am high
Bulls?
on a team, I'm high on Pete Lembo and Buffalo.
Why?
So they bring in Dequann Roberson, who I think was recruited to Penn State in 2018. I think that was the correct year. We're now deep into 2025. It's not even barely 2025. We are deep into 2025. But in year one, Pete Lembo, who has experience in the MAC, returned to the MAC. Patriot League guy.
Yeah.
Played at Georgetown, coached at Lehigh. So maybe I just have a soft spot for a guy with Pat League bona fides.
That's right.
But year one, coming in late with how Mo Linguist left, and getting this team to a bowl game, getting this team to 9 wins, I just think he's quality. Speaking of soft spot, this is like kind of a sidebar. I like special teams coaches getting head coaching jobs.
You're a big Shane Beamer guy?
Well, it's Shane Beamer. Urban Meyer had special teams experience. John Harbaugh, right, was the special teams coach for the Eagles before he took the Ravens job. There's something about those guys where you have to pay so much attention to detail regarding so many different facets of football, and that if your team has good special teams, it kind of limits dumb mistakes. And if you're a college football team playing in a competitive conference and you can limit dumb mistakes in punt coverage, in kicking field goals or blocking field goals or hands team situations, I just kind of like that. I don't know what it is. And I think you're just on the margins. It's going to be a positive thing if you have more hands on deck with special teams.
Fair enough.
Okay. So I think Dequann Roberson, we'll see. Penn State to UConn to Kansas State, now to Buffalo. Sure. Great.
4 schools in 7 years?
4 schools in 7 years. They opened with Minnesota. Okay. Interesting enough. Their road games like Central Michigan with a new coach, Bowling Green with a new coach, UMass with a new coach, Kent State with a new coach. That's pretty good. They miss Toledo. They miss who else do they miss? They get Bowling Green. And they have Miami, but like Miami's at home after that Central Michigan game. Like they don't have the Ohio State and Michigan and Texas. They don't have those teams. They have Minnesota to open the year. I just think there's a lot of wins on this schedule. We'll see what happens with the UConn game. I don't know. I like it. So I'm in on Buffalo once again. I'm in on Pete Lembo. They hit the portal well enough, and if Dequann Roberson is at least decent, that puts them ahead of most of the teams in the MAC.
And the other thing that I noticed when I read through on Buffalo, it seems like they have fewer defensive question marks.
Yes, led by the defense. Another team led by its defense.
Yeah, like they have a good size up front, which tends to, I think, translate pretty well in the MAC. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes when we're talking about MAC teams, I know this was the case last year, a lot of half teams.
Yes.
A lot of half teams. This isn't to say there aren't questions on offense. I think there are questions about all these teams, but I would much rather come down on the side of having a good defense.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't hate Buffalo at all, and you're, I think, inkling to like them. I think they're physical on offense. I think there's a lot of upside on offense. So I'm with you on that front.
It is hard to know, to be fair to all of this, what win totals mean when so many of these teams, this has been the trend recently, are deficient on offense. And you're talking about they won 5 in a row to finish the year. But also, that was the number 127, 106, 111, 133. And then they beat Liberty in the bowl game, but Liberty was going through a lot of personnel changes themselves. So you're just like, what does it mean to win 9 or 10 games in the MAC when there are so many such dramatic half teams? So if your starting point is a good coach in Pete Lembo, a promising-ish quarterback in Dequann Roberson, a good defense to start things out, and honestly, a pretty advantageous schedule. I don't know if Buffalo's winning. I'm just really high on this Buffalo team.
So you're saying
Yeah.
a lot of heat.
They've
on
got
Buffalo.
heat for me.
What about, so how does Buffalo, I know you mentioned Toledo before.
Yeah.
In your mind, as you're looking through Toledo, Buffalo, Miami, the real Miami
here.
and the Ohio Bobcats, of those four teams, do you have a preference? Because a lot of places are in on Toledo.
Sure.
Or Buffalo. I mean, there's a lot of steam on Buffalo as well. But, there's been a winning tradition, I think, recently at all four of those schools with respect to the MAC.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of on the margins because a lot of these teams, those top 4, top 5 teams play each other. And especially near the end of the season, I believe Toledo's at Miami later on in the year. And that's the sort of range of games once they get to November. This is true for everybody in the MAC. If you look at the MAC schedule, week 10 or whatever in November is like November 4th through November 8th. Because that's when the MACtion starts, right? So then calendars become so wonky for these teams. And then you see the results that sort of mirror that wonkiness. So I like Toledo's roster better than I like anybody else's roster. So I'm probably going to give the edge to Toledo. They don't play each other during the year, Toledo and Buffalo. Ohio's schedule at the end is pretty great. So they're on the road. So starting October 25th, they're on the road at Eastern Michigan, who I think is okay. I think the job Chris Creighton has been incredible given the depths of this program to keep this program like 500-ish.
Yeah,
Noah Kim is now competing for the starting quarterback job at Eastern Michigan, his third stop, so back to the state of Michigan. But again, this is just another team that has a lot of deficiencies, especially on offense. And the defense for Eastern Michigan isn't that far ahead. But the good thing about Eastern Michigan is Chris Creighton's like, screw it. We need to win games. Let's take chances. Let's do everything we can all of the time to eke out a little bit of an advantage. And so he's sort of the anti-Chuck Martin in that way. I probably, if we're looking at this conference as a conference that has immense turnover basically everywhere, so then continuity becomes the secret sauce. And I think I like Miami a little bit more. Now, Miami's schedule at the end is brutal. But in terms of continuity, in terms of upside at quarterback, if I'm going to say over the course of all these years that quarterback and defense is my elixir, Dequann Finn and Miami's defense, I feel like is a really good elixir. That said, Miami ends the year at Ohio, Toledo, at Buffalo before getting Ball State. So it's just a really tough November.
No.
So to answer your question, I like Buffalo and I like Toledo and I like Miami. In what order? I'm going to say Buffalo on top. I just think schedule-wise, there are just more wins. So I'm going Bulls here.
This is a conference, mind you, that at least for some portion of the end of last season, we thought could have a 6-way tie.
Correct.
So there's not a whole lot of disparity as we're talking about some of these teams at the top. And frankly, who knows with like a team Northern Illinois, who knows what we're going to get out of Bowling Green with a new coach, Eddie George, who you mentioned. My hunch is that as we get into November, we're going to see more of that clustering, and it will make for an interesting conversation around the MAC.
So here's another interesting thing, just more broadly speaking nationally about the MAC. It seems every year one of the quality teams either puts the fear of death into a power conference team or just full on beats them and leaves Matt Campbell beside himself. Ohio has Rutgers on the road in week 1. Toledo has Kentucky on the road in week 1. Miami has Wisconsin week 1. Buffalo has Minnesota week 1. And I mean, Ball State has Purdue, but there's a little bit of intrigue in all of those matchups because all those power conference teams have a ton of questions and could be looking past their MAC opponents week 1. I'm just saying one of them is going to put a lot of fear into a fan base in late August.
That's a good call. That's a really good shout. Yeah.
So otherwise, just sort of meaty middle within the MAC. Like Central Michigan has a new coach, comes over from Army, was briefly their offensive coordinator, then their offensive line coach, and Mike Drinkle. And he's going to be looking to fully revitalize this offense, which has struggled. We'll see. Western Michigan has had the offense, but has at times had a catastrophically bad defense under Lance Taylor. We'll see. There's no reason at this juncture to fully believe in Western Michigan, but somebody's going to come out of this. Bowling Green, I mentioned a little bit. Bowling Green is my wild card team, just because they're the team that have brought in so many defensive transfers. Thank you. I don't know what Drew Pine is in 2025.
I know what Drew Pine was baggage. In 2023.
Yeah, exactly. A guy who could beat Clemson. So that's exactly who Drew Pine was. I think he's fine. They lost one of the best playmakers in college football in Harold Fannin. We loved Harold Fannin, and he lit up, I think, Penn State and Texas A&M early on last year. They don't have somebody like that, but there is the Eddie George gets his first real shot now as an FBS coach. I don't know. There's something likable about Bowling Green right now, just because they were down so far, and Scott Loeffler dragged them to become an interesting program. They were competitive with Penn State for a half. There's just enough there, and they get America's team to open up the season in the Lafayette Leopards. So there's that. Their road schedule is difficult. There's Cincinnati on the road, Louisville on the road, Ohio on the road. They have Eastern Michigan on the road. It's not amazing, but I think Eddie George could be of a decent quality for Bowling Green.
Eddie looks like he could still play, by the way.
He absolutely looks terrific.
I don't know if he's got any eligibility left, but they could use him.
Yeah. Otherwise, I talked about the teams that are just going to they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to survive this season, whether it's Akron, UMass, Ball State, I think is going to be pretty down this year. Once again, they make their coaching change. So I don't know. I think that's where we are. I think there's 3 or 4 teams that have the ability to go bowling in that middle if they're able to regroup after tough Septembers. There's 3 or 4 teams that are going to eat each other alive at the top. And I sort of hemmed and hawed about who I actually like the best. I think it's still Buffalo, because I think the combination of coaching and schedule is meaningful. I'm going to go Buffalo and then Toledo and then Miami and then Ohio. Just because it's a year 1 coach dealing with a lot of changes, even with quarterback back. So I'm going to go Toledo and Buffalo, and I think give the edge to Buffalo in this moment, pending what they get out of quarterback.
I like it. Okay. We got 1 conference left.
Okay.
I will try not to drone on the way I did with the Sun Belt.
It's okay.
When I talk about the American.
You were intrigued by the Sun Belt. Nobody's going to fault you by that.
I was really intrigued by the Sun Belt.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued by the Sun Belt. The American. Let's talk about the American. I think, bigger picture, we're going to keep having this debate now, especially in the playoff era, about which conference is strongest. I think the American is strongest at the top. I won't speak to the whole conference and averages. And look, there are a lot of bad teams in the American as well.
Right.
Just as there are the Sun Belt, as there are the MAC. But at the top, you've got a cluster of, I'm going to say, 5 teams that could realistically make a case as a contender. They also, all of these teams are dealing with this push-pull of the transfer portal. Like Tulane, one of the top-tier G5 programs, really took it on the chin.
Darian Mensah and Mekhi Hughes have moved on.
Took it on the chin. They lost those 2 guys. They lost 6 others who were starters. Most programs here are in the same boat, where they're losing their best players year in and year out to power conferences. Then there's this power vacuum, which weirdly opens up the door for underdogs to swoop in and try to build their own transfer class and maybe make a run at the conference. So it's bad, but it's also good, again, for the aforementioned hipster G5 fans out there
who have no idea what to think of any of these teams. Yeah.
No, but it does make it fun to root for some of these conferences. It really, truly does.
Here's how you could look at it from a heat perspective, from a hotness perspective, Ty. Because I was thinking about this a lot with the MAC as well. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no, please.
This feels like a nice place to fit this thought in. People talk about the end of college football as we know it, and how are these smaller conferences going to compete when, the bigger conference are scooping up the biggest programs from wherever, the Mountain West or the American, and NIL has rendered it, and the portal has rendered all of these situations to be so basically borderline untenable.
Yeah.
That it basically feels like a meteor is coming for the American, for the Sun Belt, for the MAC, for the Mountain West, whatever. If you think about it, though, if we found out that a catastrophic life-ending meteor were coming to Earth, you have one of two choices here. You can freak out and hide and just dread everything, or you can find your nearest bottle of whatever and start getting weird with the people you love the most, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, if you love these conferences the most, it's about to get weird.
It's about to get really
It's about
weird.
to get weird.
It's going to continue being weird. The thought that kept coming to mind as I was looking in particular through the American is there is probably a lot of fun to be had and headlines to be made if somebody just decides to go full Moneyball.
Yeah.
Full Moneyball with this thing. Just Moneyball the crap out of the portal. Build a beast scouting department. Build a conference champ on the fly exclusively out of the portal because you're better than your opponents at scouting.
Yeah.
I think that's out there.
Pay your
I really
scouting
do.
department in classes and books.
Yeah, and
That's the
look,
problem.
like the American's interesting. The American's been a good conference for a long time. No offense to the beloved service academies, but when Army and Navy make up two of the three best defenses in your conference, you might not be a very good defensive conference.
Right.
Right now, only Army projects as the top 50 defense in this conference.
Damn.
It's going to be a lot of offense. They're not going to play a whole lot of defense. Just get used to it. Let's get used to it. By the way, this is the second straight year where I was hoping for a scheduling quirk where somebody would play both Army and Navy on back-to-back weeks. That has not happened again for the second straight year. We got a couple teams, North Texas, Temple, Tulsa, and UAB, that play them both, but none of them play them on consecutive weeks. Sooner or later, it's going to happen. That's going to suck for whoever it has to be.
Mm-hmm.
But here is where I am at. All right. Everybody's going to be talking up Tulane. I want to talk up USF. USF is my team.
Oh, man. You're falling for it like I did last year. Yeah.
For like the fifth straight year, USF is my team. And I'm referring to them as my October surprise. And here's why.
Okay.
USF comically starts its season. Here are the first 3 weeks. Home against Boise State. On the road against Florida. On the road at Miami of Florida.
Okay.
Then they play like South Carolina State or somebody. There's a pretty good chance they're going to start 1-3. But this is a good team. There's a lot back, a ton of returning production, like 11th nationally. 8 starters back on both sides of the ball if you factor in the transfers. Byron Brown, I believe, should be back and healthy. He didn't play in the spring game because he had like a hamstring thing. But
okay.
He snapped his leg 5 games into the year last year. And from that point forward, they were just Alex Golish was just trying to figure it out.
Well, he was also like refusing to talk about his status, and
Yeah,
people had no
like-
idea near the end of the year what his actual status was. Playing very coy. Yeah.
It was a whole thing. But I believe he's back. They've got an experienced line. They've got a good receiver room. The defense has a lot back. I'd like for the defense to be a little bit more consistent. But they're going to play quick. They're going to run a million plays. I'm asking the Verballerhood to live dangerously with me and pick USF to win the MAC. Or excuse me, the American. We already talked about the MAC. They could win the MAC. But I think they also could win the American. I am aggressively going over 6.5 for USF.
Ty.
I push all the chips in the middle for USF. I say October surprise because I think September's going to suck, but in October, people are going to start realizing that, hey, USF's actually a pretty good team.
Yeah.
So caught the bad break last season with Byron Brown going down a couple games in, but even still went 6-6, went to a bowl game and won.
Man, they beat
That was
some
the,
awful teams though. So
they did, but they won the bowl game. I think they played against San Jose State in that 5 overtime.
they did.
game.
That was a really fun game.
It was a fun game.
Yeah.
I'm in on USF. I'm really in on USF. this year.
Okay.
I'm in on Tulane as much as anybody's in on Tulane. You know, they deserve to be in the top tier. 9-5 last year. They lost to K-State. And, Oklahoma early. Then they went out with a whimper, losing 3 in a row. It's probably still the best team in the conference. There's probably still a very good shot of them going 11-1 and winning the thing and grabbing a playoff spot. Ultimately, if you are looking at Tulane, here is what is going to be the determining factor for their season. It's the middle of September and then a 4-week stretch between middle of October and early November.
Okay.
If you want to make the playoff, if you're Tulane, you got to win the Darian Mensah Bowl, which is going to happen 3rd week of September when Duke comes to town. And then they've got a road game against Ole Miss the following week. You got to beat Duke. You got to be competitive against Ole Miss. It's that simple. And then later in the year, there is this stretch, Army, a bye week at UTSA, at Memphis. Those 3 games, I think, pretty much define the whole season in the American for Tulane.
I agree.
I think they're worse on offense. I think they're better on defense.
Which makes sense.
I think last year's team had more higher-end talent. This year's team maybe a little bit more depth. That may be Phil Steele's creative way of saying that they're worse, but he still has optimism for Tulane. They were really aggressive in the transfer portal. If they do take a step back on offense, it's not really their fault because they did lose Darian Mensah. Oregon did steal Mekhi Hughes.
Steal?
They stole him.
It's a very appealing place to a lot of people, Ty.
So their quarterback, I think, is Brendan Sullivan from Iowa.
Yeah.
I just think it's going to look different on offense because the quarterbacks aren't as good. The personnel is different. They're going to need to rely more on the running game and less on Darian Mensah just creating a play and bombing it deep, that type of thing. So I do think there's a chance that some of the previews I saw are overvaluing Tulane. I also think a good number of them may be undervaluing Tulane's defense, sort of
Okay.
a double-sided coin there. I don't know. Like, I think it's a really good front seven. I think they're going to pose a problem for most of the teams in this conference. They're thin at corner. It's a problem if they get injuries and that sort of thing. But their win total is 8.5. I understand the logic. I just think they're 9-3 at worst. This is a good team. Don't get me wrong. I just kind of like USF a little bit more.
Man. Okay. I think I like USF fine depending on their offensive health. Once they get to the American. They open it was Boise State, Florida, and Miami is what USF opens with.
It's brutal. It's brutal. So they're going to go 1-3 in September. They're going to go 1-3. They're going to hit a bye week before they get into October. And I can tell you, college football fans who don't really pay attention to the American are going to look at USF and they're going to say, oh, they're 1-3.
Yeah.
But who cares? After that, after we get into October, this is when the October surprise occurs.
Yeah.
This is when they start winning. It's like, okay, everybody's sleeping on USF because they forgot about them. They had a bad record to start the season. Well, maybe the context here is important. And I think this is when they make their move. But Byron Brown's got to be healthy.
That's Boise week 1, though, and it's at home, correct?
Correct.
So Boise is traveling across the country to play in Tampa, Florida in late August with no Ashton Genty.
No Ashton Genty.
Boise State is definitively better, but situationally, getting week 1, that's interesting.
It's
Georgia. It was Georgia Southern last year, right? That scored a bunch of points in a shootout against Boise's defense because it was in Georgia. Okay.
And I mean, look, they're going to play an up-tempo, fun version of an offense. If Miami and Corey Heatherman can't get their defense sorted out,
Miami will be fine. But yeah,
you want to talk about these games where they put the fear of God into somebody?
I know. I hear you. You're not wrong.
Could be one of those situations.
Yeah, USF did 2 years ago with Bama. Yeah.
I'm not sure they're winning any of those 3 games that we mentioned, but it's of note. Let's talk about the service academies real quick. I like them both. Bryson Daly is gone from Army, which sucks.
Yeah.
That's an enormous void. I don't know how they fill it. One of the reasons why they were so successful last year is because they tweaked the offense to fit more of his game. I think they're going to need to do that again. All right. New quarterback, I think, is Dwayne Coleman. I think that's going to be the dude. They also lose their running back, Kanye Udo. They're going to need to make some modifications here. They really are. I don't know what the offense looks like. I mean, we know what the offense looks like. I just don't know how effective it's going to be.
He ended up at Arizona State, by the way, Kanye Udo.
I believe so.
For the ultimate change, going from
the ultimate change. Talk
West
about a
Point
cultural
to Tempe. Yeah.
Cultural change. The defense, though, for Army, as I mentioned earlier, is what gives them the high floor. Opponents, because of the way they play offense, only get the ball about 9 times. So if you've got a competent defense, that's starting you out in a pretty good spot. If your defense is above average, which Army certainly is, you're going to be a conference contender. And I think that's the case again here. Their season, they've got 3 road games that are going to define everything. At K-State week 2, at Tulane middle of October, at UTSA on Black Friday. I'm not counting the Army-Navy game. By the way, they need to move Army-Navy to week 0, especially now with them being in the same conference. And like the scheduling is just weird, especially if they end up having to play in a title game.
Which they won. They won the conference last year. Yeah,
I know. Just play at week 0. I get that it's breaking a tradition, but it's maybe a fun way to start out the year. Move it. Let's move on with our lives.
I hear you.
I like Army. I like them more on defense than I do on offense because I have more questions about their offense.
Yeah.
And then Navy, the first thing that jumps out to me about Navy, which went 10-3 last season, beat Oklahoma in a bowl game.
Yeah.
They have a very favorable schedule.
Horvath is back, right?
Blake Horvath is back, yeah. He's back. As is most of the backfield.
Good.
So we could probably stop the preview right there if we wanted. Because I think the offense is going to hum. I think the line is, dealing with some turnover. But Navy's been good at plugging in guys. Even when they don't know who those guys are going to be, they've been very good at just plugging and playing along that line. But the schedule is why you like Navy. They got the game against Notre Dame, but they have Army later in the year. Who knows if it's going to matter at that point. They miss Tulane. They miss UTSA. They miss USF. And they get Memphis on the road late in the year, which is going to be a tough spot a week before, I guess a game before that Army spot to close out the year. But like Navy going 9-3 and hitting their 8.5 over feels really good to me. That feels like a good bet. I don't know if they're going to be able to stop the pass. I kind of think they won't again, but they might be a little bit better at it. And it is a defense as a whole that returns a fair amount. So if you start talking about a team that's just marginally better, they do have a NFL caliber lineman, Landon Robinson, their nose guard. I think maybe the defense in the front 7 can improve. It's just the secondary again for me.
Right.
Couldn't stop the pass last year either. So I like the service academies. I think they're going to be a player with respect to the conference. But I like those other 2 teams more.
I kind of like the service academies in the American, by the way. I kind of like that they're getting regular, maybe potential budding rivalry games. I like seeing them when they're of quality, playing in conference championship games. I like it. I think it's fun to have a more regular service academy schools in our lives as college football fans instead of just like jumping around and playing Notre Dame and San Jose State and Arizona State. Like I like this.
I really like UTSA.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what I don't like. Everything about their defense.
Okay. Fine.
They got some interesting linebacker transfers from like Alabama and TCU. I don't know if they got a pass rush. I think the secondary is going to be a problem. Even though they got some like interesting linebackers, they don't really have any depth or experience there. I don't like that at all.
So
but
what's interesting about them? That they happen to be like third string dudes at bigger schools?
No, I like their offense.
No, I know, but I'm saying with the linebackers. Yeah.
They got a guy from Alabama and TCU. Yeah, that's why.
Okay.
82% of their production is back on offense, though, as are 9 starters.
Awesome.
So Owen McCown's back. They're loaded out wide. The line is solid. It's deep. They're going to score like 35 points a game. I also really like Jeff Traylor. He's going to be in his 6th season at UTSA. Despite starting 3-5 last season, they ended up going to a bowl. They finished 7-6. So having him gives them stability. He's a great coach. Put a lot of emphasis in the offseason. I saw an interview where somebody talked about little things, right? They were poorly coached in some key moments. They're trying to get accountability and discipline, all these tropes that we hear in the preseason. The TLDR is that UTSA is going to be a hell of a half team this year. They're going to play in a lot of shootouts, and it's a really fun schedule to play as a half team.
Hit me.
At Texas A&M week 1. Who the hell knows?
Great.
It's going to be a good offense. Home against Texas State in that rivalry week 2. 2 teams that are going to play shootouts. Then they're home against Tulane end of October. They're at USF the following week. and then they're home against Army to close out the year. So I'm including UTSA in my contender tier because I think the offense is so good that it's going to put them in that prime position. I think for my money that UTSA is the new Memphis this year. That's something that I've been kicking around here in my preview notes.
Okay.
They are the new Memphis.
Late in the year, you're like, are they 8-1 with some like the loss to A&M? Okay.
Don't play any defense, but they're dynamite on offense. They're the new Memphis.
Okay.
I'm out, by the way, on Memphis.
Okay.
I'm totally out.
Side
on
note,
Memphis.
yeah.
Totally out. Phil Steele, I think he had them first. A bunch of people had Memphis first. People are really high on Memphis this year. Nearly everybody has them as a contender, which I get the logic. Everybody is just panning the fact, Dan, that they lost Seth Hennigan, who was there for 4 years, was a crazy productive quarterback. They lost a 1,300-yard running back on top of that and their top 5 receivers. That feels like a lot for a program, doesn't it?
Yep.
Like they've almost exclusively fielded half teams over the years. So the offense has to work in order for this team to be any good. When you lose all of your offense, why is everybody just assuming, oh, yeah, it'll work again? That'd be great. It'll be fine. Oh, by the way, the quarterback that everybody's talking up this year, Brendan Lewis. Remember him?
Of course. Colorado
and Nevada?
Yeah.
He's going to be the guy? No. I'm out.
Okay.
I'm out. There's a step back coming. No offense to Brendan Lewis. No offense to a Memphis program that's been pretty good over the years, but
down year. A regression year.
Not a down year. It's an 8-4 year.
Oh, okay. Down year for them.
It's a good schedule.
Yeah.
And one game that you should note here, if we're pulling out our laser pointer.
I'm not necessarily pointing at any flaws. I'm pointing right now at
this
perfection.
Is perfection. They get Arkansas coming to town a week before Arkansas goes back home to play Notre Dame. And
ooh, the look-ahead action.
If you have read up anything on Arkansas this year, and we had some people send this in to us, Arkansas, people in Fayetteville are already talking up that Notre Dame game. That Notre Dame game is going to be very much on the radar for the Arkansas faithful and the team. So I would not be at all surprised if they go to Memphis a week before and it's like, this is a team that still can play offense, might not be as good at it.
De facto Super Bowl tie.
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's what I'm talking about.
SEC team coming to town. Okay.
Yeah. Those are like my main points of intrigue in the American. Those 5 teams, Tulane, USF, Army, Navy, and UTSA. At Memphis, I guess I put Memphis in my wishful thinking tier.
Okay.
Because I'm just not buying it. The other team that's in my wishful thinking tier is North Texas. North Texas, another one of these teams that, historically has been a half team. They're interesting to me this year just on a very personal level because they have 2 quarterbacks with 4-syllable last names.
Okay.
Okay. Nobody else cares about that type of thing. That's the type of thing that I care about. But this is a program that enters what I think is a really important 3rd year for Eric Morris, their coach. They need to show some significant progress here. They need to show it. They need to address some of their defensive struggles. Defense has just been such a problem. They're going to be good on offense. I think there's a high ceiling on offense. They run that air raid. It's going to continue to be the case. Drew Mestemaker, Reese Poffenbarger. Those are your quarterbacks.
From Miami via, where was he before? Reese Poffenbarger.
I'm drawing a blank.
Was it Albany?
Long last name.
Okay.
They got good running back depth. They got good receivers. They got an unproven defense, Dan.
Reese Poffenbarger, ODU to Albany to Miami to North Texas. Okay.
What a journey. Yeah. What a journey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about the defense. Their defensive front turned over guys. Their secondary is rebuilding. They've just not been able to demonstrate that they can get to, whatever that next level is considered. So he's got to do it this year. Otherwise, I think there could be some changes.
Okay.
Interested in that on the North Texas side. And then we're talking about a bunch of programs that I lumped together into just, a whatever tier. I don't know what to make of ECU. We've got a handful of programs that I put in my new coach, thank you, next tier. Temple, FAU, Charlotte, Rice, and Tulsa.
Yeah.
And then we've got UAB, which I put in my should hire a new coach tier.
Yes. Agree.
I don't know how much detail you want me to go into with any of these programs. We're
whatever your
here.
most pressing thoughts are.
Like, I'm really interested in Temple and Casey Keeler. If I'm just talking about new coaches entering into situations, I don't think any of these teams are going to be very good, by the way.
Yeah.
So for me to sit here and talk about like two deeps and stuff like that, which I could do and I have on my note sheet, I'm not going to do that because that's beside the point. Casey Keeler is interesting because he's got roots in this part of the country. He's an old school guy. He's been trumpeting this Temple tough culture thing, which he's trying to get guys to buy into.
He was what, Delaware to Sam Houston?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So he's like all in.
Okay.
He's all in on this part of the country. He's trying to build this toughness and this culture and that sort of thing. We'll see. I don't think Temple's going to be very good. Zach Kitley at FAU is interesting to me.
Yeah.
If only because we know that there is a track record there for him coaching up offense. Also, I think he's been able to flip the roster in his first year and bring in a bunch of transfers. There has definitely been some magnetism with this guy coming over from his previous stops, knowing what he did on offense to FAU. So I think he's going to be able to get that offense in a really interesting spot pretty quickly. He was able to bring over Caden Veltkamp, the quarterback that he helped recruit to Western Kentucky.
Right.
So if nothing more, you bring a guy like that in, you should be fairly competent at quarterback. He knows the system because there's familiarity there already with Zach Kitley. I think the quarterback position could be fun. I think there'll be an interesting receiver hookup between him and Easton Messer, also who comes over from Western Kentucky. That'll be fun if you're an FAU fan. That'll be fun.
Definitely.
Otherwise, though, it's like a defensive rebuild. There's not a lot of experience. There's not a lot of depth. They're turning over a bunch of running backs. Like, it's outside of Messer. I don't know what to expect at wide receiver. So it's going to be the type of thing that takes a while at FAU. But they're of interest to me because of that.
Sure.
Charlotte, Tim Albin. It's like brand new situation again.
Brought a bunch of dudes from Ohio.
Did bring a bunch of dudes. There's a huge roster transformation that's taking place. I think it's important to set expectations that this could be a 4 or 5 win team, reaching a bowl game.
Charlotte's been a tough job. It seems like it's a better job than it's been, but Will Healy and Biff Poggi just couldn't get it.
It seems like, this is getting to a bowl is, in my view, a near impossibility. I just don't see it. If they do, it'd be a huge dub for Tim Albin in year one. I think they'll be solid running the ball. They've got some decent options at quarterback, but it's just going to take a while, man. It's going to take a while for any of this to take effect. Who did I miss here? ECU, I don't know. I don't know. They could make a bowl. I'm interested in ECU. I think there's some momentum at ECU. Catton Hauser for ECU had a good season last year.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be interesting. I like their receivers. I just don't know about the defense again. There's been a big overhaul on defense.
They finished the year well last year.
They did.
They ended up beating NC State with a bunch of fighting in the bowl game.
That's right.
But it was a strong end to the year. It was a slow start, but they finished impressively, if memory serves. Now, the teams they played weren't great. In Temple,
No.
FAU, Tulsa's the other team you haven't mentioned, and North Texas was a 500 team. They lose to Navy, but win the winnable games, and that's what ECU did.
All of these teams that I'm talking about here towards the end, and frankly in the beginning, everybody's got defensive questions, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Tulsa's interesting because Trey Lamb's got an interesting track record. He's from Eastern Tennessee State. He's only 35 years old. He's the second youngest coach.
God, he's
in
a couple
FBS.
generations removed from you. Yeah.
The youngest is Zach Kitley, who I just mentioned. He's only 33.
Jeez.
But this is a dude with a track record. He's a track record. He's got a track record. So it's a rebuilding situation, but he went to an FCS playoff game with Gardner-Webb, Eastern Tennessee. Like, his best offenses have been really balanced, pretty explosive. So it's going to take time to build that up, but I don't hate the move for Tulsa. And then let me just close this thing out with UAB and Rice real quick. Make or break season for Trent Dilfer.
Of course.
Got to do something. Got to figure out a way to make this work, because otherwise, if they don't get better on defense, it's over. Full stop. It's over. I don't have high expectations for this team. I think they'll play offense well. I don't know what to expect on defense, though. They just got to get that defensive thing sorted out. The defense has been such a liability. They allow so many points, so many yards. It's really hard to win like that. And Rice has a new coach, Scott Abel.
Yep.
He's going to implement a shotgun spread option attack, which could be fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. They actually got a little bit going these past couple of years, Rice.
Yeah.
Not enough under Mike Bloomgren, but they got a couple things going.
Quentin Jackson, Tajee Atkins are their running back tandem that I'm really interested in watching in that system in particular.
Okay.
And there are some bright spots on defense, actually. The secondary is pretty good against the pass. Ty Morris is a fun linebacker for them that I think is going to be a name brand player in the American. But it's just a transition year offensively, especially on the line. It's a system like that requires that you have a quarterback that knows how to run it. So it might take a while to figure out who that is. And there's just, again, more turnover on defense, broadly speaking. So long story short, I'm in on USF. I like USF. I think I like USF over Tulane. That's my predicted order of finish in the American.
Okay. Wow.
Double Bulls show with you going Buffalo, with me going USF.
Yes, sir.
And then just to put a bow on all this thing, I'm going to stick with JMU as my team in the Sun Belt.
I like it.
1 hour, 38 minutes here on my timer. Next episode, we're going into the Mountain West. We're going to talk about Conference USA. We'll talk about the Pac-2.
Pac-2, the last year of the Pac-2, because we've got a lot of Mountain West and I guess movement because of it. But yes, there's going to be a Pac-12, which will have nowhere near 12 teams next season. But yeah.
I have an inordinate number of notes here that I did not get to on the Sun Belt. I'm way too interested in the Sun Belt. I am sorry if anybody out there is offended by how much time I spent on the Sun Belt.
Don't be offended.
I hope
Ty's super interested.
I'm very interested in the Sun Belt this year. Yeah, I poured my heart and soul into the Sun Belt.
Okay.
So, big thanks to everybody out there for following along with this. We've got a part 2 coming up on our next episode. We would encourage you, again, to hit follow, hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of that. And, of course, like I said, I'm going to go into detail on one of our upcoming bonus episodes talking about some of these teams that I was really interested in. We'll do it maybe a little bit like we did last year, where we dove in, covered some more specific position groups and stuff out on Patreon on the bonus episode for ballers.com.
Yeah.
If you're interested in that, Dan.
Great.
All right. Why don't we call it quits on this episode? Why don't we come back strong on the next one? We'll talk through more of the G5/G6. I don't know what the proper nomenclature is for this at this point. We will do that on our next episode. We will round things out before we dive on into the ACC.
Yes, sir.
For that guy over there, my good friend, Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrand, thank you for bearing with us here on the first of our conference preview episodes. Talk to you all next episode. Stay solid.
Peace.